Hello, my name is Andrew Fitzsimons, and I want to thank Carcanet Press for inviting me to talk about Thomas Kinsella's last poems. Like many Irish people of my generation, I first encountered Thomas Kinsella in the anthology Soundings, which was the set text for the Leaving Certificate, the final secondary school exam in Ireland. He was the only living poet on the syllabus. He was from Dublin, so for those reasons he stood out. And for the power of the work, he stayed with me, and I went on to do my PhD in Trinity College Dublin on his work, which became the book The Sea of Disappointment, during the preparation for which I finally met the man. We corresponded over the last 20 years or so, and worked closely together on his selected prose called Prose Occasion, which was published by Carcanet Press in 2009. I live in Tokyo. Every summer I would come back and drop in on him and Eleanor and the family in their house in Booterstown in Dublin. I even visited them once when they were living in Philadelphia. I remember, I think it was the last time I saw him, in fact, in the summer of 2018, he said that he had stopped writing poetry, that he had drained the gift to the last drop. So when I was back in the summer of 2022 and met Sarah after he had passed, of course, in December 2021, I was elated to find out that he had actually started writing again. And we can see in the last section of this book some of these new poems, but also that some of the poems were poems from his very first years as a poet. The final section of that book, I think, is given a wonderful title, Written, Revised and Recovered. This idea of recovered is very powerful to me. I recall something he wrote in 1958 in the Poetry Book Society bulletin for his first book, the book called Another September. And he talks about these early poems, and he says, I wrote my first poem when I was 18 out of curiosity, my second as a joke. The third was written soon after with a faint foreboding. When I write now, it is with feelings like those of the redemptorist preacher's sparrow, which so foolishly devoted itself to the task of transporting to an unknown destination, grain by grain, and for a reason it could scarcely grasp, the sands of the sea. We now have that destination before us and transported grain by grain, and I find it very moving to think of him looking back on that first work, going back to those very first things he'd written when he was scarcely out of his teens and when he was only discovering himself, and the confirmation that he must have found in them that he would want to publish some of them again here. And what do they confirm? I think they confirm that the inklings and intimations and discoveries of those first poems were right. That what his poetry would come to concern itself with, love, death, the artistic act, the workings of time, the deep matter of a human life, were already in place. And I like to think of the old man looking back at that young man and thinking that, with a final and full realization that poetry had not indeed been a foolish devotion. At times in his last work, the poems sound like prayers. And one of the new poems that struck me most and moved me most is one that is the most prayerful, I think. And I think it's also one of the most tender things he ever wrote. So I'd like to end these few words by reading it. Beauty. The pale bare soul is the heart of a closed flower. In warmth and conscious tenderness, petal and petal unfolds. Thought and thought curls away, and worm soft, the soul, which is life, is exposed. In its presence, that which is beautiful, which is also a closed flower, opens and exposes its soul. and its soul is the life of the everlasting Spirit flowing from beyond, through and beyond all things. Communion. Pure is the sacrament.